Good morning, good afternoon, My name is Tracey Michell. I'm a senior policy analyst, but I'll be representing Lincoln Hallgren on his presentation on jurisdiction. Before I go to the PowerPoint, I just want to do some background about Lincoln. Lincoln is the in-house counsel and executive director for children and family jurisdiction at CSFS. He's a member of the Lake Babine Nation from the Lakchabu clan, and he assumed the role of under the jurisdiction in March 2025, which Mabel was his predecessor. She held that role since 2020, and Lincoln gives gratitude to Mabel for her mentorship and years of service to CSFS. Previous to Mabel, Stephanie Cohnfeld held the lead in jurisdiction since 2020. Oh, sorry, Mabel assumed her role in 2022, and Stephanie held her role since 2020. So part of the supports for Lincoln include a staff consisting of 5 broad areas. One is Odie Hota, he's a jurisdiction manager. Miriam Bright is his executive assistant. Stephanie Cohnfeld is a jurisdiction governance advisor. And as well as CSFS executive directors, the colleagues, they provide assistance and lead internal committees. Communications, as Marlena mentioned, Bethany Neufeld and Jessie Shale are also assistants to support. So I'm going to cover Lincoln's presentation here now. We'll be covering what has been happening, where we are, and what is to come. So some of the key areas that we're looking at in jurisdiction, I think one pivotal thing to be aware of when we're talking about jurisdiction is we've mentioned yesterday and throughout this morning's presentation that CSFS has been providing supports and services for the last 30 years, since 1990. And the mandate for CSFS was to provide children and family support services until the member nations achieve self-governance. So now, with the passing of the new legislation from the federal government, gives us the opportunity to develop our legislation. So what we're doing as we introduce legislation to our communities is we are trying to not only bridge our obligation as meeting our due diligence for child safety under the legislation, which constitutes the national standards under the Act, and as well as the dispute resolution process. So we're trying to meet, as an organization, those requirements. But what we want to do is to add that Indigenous component. So we want to expand our existing services to include those areas of, like we discussed today, like the traditional decision-making, the Wanini Council, all those components is where we want to add the Indigenous component. This Indigenous component was not something that is new to our nations. We're using the traditional Batlach as our framework. So similar to our preliminary discussions as a house that we have before we have a smoke feast, that is the component that we're using and applying to our process. We recognize that not all the nations use the Batlach system, but we are using the principles of that. And those components include the existing practice of our family conferencing. We want to make sure that we add additional Indigenous participation, carriers to county participation in those discussions. So we're expanding our services to include those Indigenous lenses. And as was mentioned yesterday by both Warner and Mike, and this morning, that the laws are 95% complete. So most of these laws, they relate to the child safety, which is what Mike has been presenting this morning, and Cheryl's team is the C6 component, which is child, under MCFD, it's referenced to as the child protection, but under our laws, it's being referenced as child safety. So we're trying to meet all the legislative requirements that is required under the federal laws. And then throughout our dialogue, we're Lincoln and his team They had a chance to meet with communities and learn how important and sacred our languages and our dialects, and efforts will be made to try to translate our laws as much as possible for our nations, because we do have a number of dialects. So you can see here, like, that we want to establish the traditional laws, cultural foundations, and community support and paramountcy over provincial authority, and protecting cultural identity. The primary goal is to keep our children in communities and connected to the culture and identity. And we really rely on local community members to provide that support and assistance as much as possible. So under the community and leadership engagement, it really is about trying to add that transparency and collaboration with member nations. As we have each of our sessions in the communities, it adds more breadth to our legislation, towards our regulations, and towards our policy. So although you may see some of your discussions that were raised at different meetings and it may not be in the legislation, don't think that it's been ignored. It will be incorporated where it is, where it's applicable. So that means it'll be in our regulations, in our policies, or in our practice standards. So our community, as Michelle had mentioned earlier, we had a high volume of community participation in different dialogues, and this is helping us to shape our legislation to reflect our unique traditions. And unique traditions representing all of our 11 member nations. And really, the legislation allows for traditional decision-making, co-development of regulations with the CSTVC, with CSFS's jurisdiction and justice, which is all working together to roll out the Yinka Dene laws. So we're honored to learn, as Lincoln says, to learn from each community's distinct governing practices. We've had a number of major events in the last year, but this is not without all the different events that we've had throughout the, this is just an overarching, there's more events that has taken place. Some of the significant events include our matriarchs, where we have a wide range of members from each of the nations who participate in our matriarchs that really provide the heart of our practice in terms of our structure and how we're developing each of the sectors. So one of the major events that were held this year was over the summer. There was an urban barbecue that was held at the Legleyton Nations Memorial Park in Prince George, where there was an engagement with members living away from home, and they discussed the jurisdiction and support for off-reserve members. And it was, as Lincoln describes, a wonderful summer day with fun events and massive feedback from members of every community and of all ages. Most significantly was the most recent legislative forum that we held in September last month. We had leaders and members from 11 participating nations attended. The opportunity was to explore legislative development, future direction, and to be prepared for the negotiating table structure. So the participants included elected leaders, hereditary chiefs, matriarchs, and community members. And it was an opportunity to immerse themselves in the draft Yinka Dene legislation. And at that session, we received ample feedback and questions. So each session is a growing opportunity for Carriers to County Family Services, where we begin to populate our legislation or our regulations. So right now, we have a lot of work to do in engagement and assistance in our communities as we build up the necessary bodies of legislation. So right now, we just recently had a meeting with Indigenous Services Canada to look at what is the requirements for the coordination agreement. So as we begin to learn what the requirements are, we begin to unfold that and bring it out to our member nations. And we're not, this is not done in isolation from our communities. I just want to mention, although it's unfortunate that there was a a request for members to attend the PEGWA session. Although members did not attend the session, Earl has been to BC to Carrier-County Family Services at 2 separate occasions. One was about 2 years ago when he first met our chiefs and our board of directors. And another time is at our leadership forum that we had held last month, and he did an excellent presentation in terms of what the governance structure is for Pegasus. So Lincoln's report is on page 5 and 6 of the AGA report. And if you want more details on the major events, you can definitely review page 6 of the AGA report. Looking ahead at jurisdiction, the objective really is to, CSFS as an organization has received the Indigenous governance body responsibility from each of the nations. And in that role, we carry the responsibility for drafting legislation. And what our goal is to really try to achieve draft legislation based on the experience that CSFS has attained through the last 30 years of practice, and try to bridge our cultural lens to this initiative. So right now, CSFS, as Mike had mentioned this morning, we do not provide child protection, but we are wanting to introduce child safety. We do have some member nations who agreed that they want to be the forefront in initiating the C6 lens into their communities. And with that, we want to expand those additional traditional governing bodies. But once we have our jurisdiction, then we're able to implement our Indigenous practices, which is currently not permitted under the existing legislation. So CSFS will continue to provide mentorship and training. We heard some of the training opportunities that Marlena had mentioned.